Hello, welcome. It's another day in the last full trading week of October. Hope your portfolio is in profit and maybe you're beating inflation and currency weakness, hopefully. But let's get to the top stories that set your agenda now. We see oil prices have climbed around 1%, reversing some of the previous session losses as Middle East tensions kept the market on edge ahead of the U.S. presidential election amid expectations of strong distillates demand in the fourth quarter. So there you have it. Big 1% jump there for Brent, $75.73 a barrel. While on the flip side, WTI, that's the U.S. grade, $71.59 a barrel. That's down as an exchange of heavy fire between Israel and Hezbollah heightened supply concerns. That's why we see that jump for Brent. Oil prices have gained nearly 4% so far, helping to trim last week's losses of more than 7%. All markets are trying to rebound from last week's steep sell-off, according to analysts, when concerns of weak demand and an oversupply may have caused an overreaction in prices. We know how investors can overreact, sometimes, and that's why we saw that big 7% drop for oil last week. Let's get a check on the FX market. Now we see the NAFEX rates that dropped by about 7 Naira, 0.47% drop, 1,643 Naira to the dollar. That was the previous close. Fast forward, 1,651 Naira. So we're still keeping and maintaining the 1,600 to 1,660 range at this time. NAFEM, 1,654 Naira to the dollar. Marginal drop, 0.07%. So it's still weakness right there for the FX market. Let's get some data out from the National Bureau of Statistics. We see the transport fare report for September. Then we see the bus journeys there. That's interstate, 7,175 Naira, up 0.22%. That's on a month-to-month basis. For air travel, the average ticket was 124. That's single routes, 124,000 Naira, up 0.80%. compared to the previous month, so we're still seeing up and up. Then for the cycles there, that's popularly known as Okada, 532 Naira, 1.48% is the bigger move up. That's when you compare it to the previous month. Then for the waterways, the average price for a trip, 1,468 Naira, 1.30% up. So transport fares on a month-to-month basis, they're up. That's for the intra-city, I think that was down that's on a year-on-year basis. All right, let's look at some other matters now. The federal government seeks to drive private capital into the country as part of the objective for participation at the ongoing IMF World Bank annual meetings. To achieve this, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edu, and the Central Bank Governor, Yemi Cardoso, have been with potential investors on the sidelines of the meetings. Ini Jombekwe has this report.
Taking advantage of the gathering of global decision makers from both the public and private sectors at the IMF World Bank annual meetings, Nigeria's economic managers from the monetary and fiscal authorities have invited potential investors to win their confidence through the ongoing reforms as well as possible opportunities available to them. Their conviction is in their effort to lift activities in the real sector, management of the country's foreign exchange market, and the value of the Naira.
We find that something else that is important from this whole adjustment lies in the fact that now Nigerians would be more inclined to produce locally because it's a lot cheaper for them to do so rather than depend on imported goods. So that's a good thing. Then, of course, with respect to the harmonization of the rates, bear in mind that for those who are used to sending money to Nigeria, they no longer have the chore of having to find other unorthodox methods of sending their money home.
The team believes that the issues of debt accretion and servicing, as well as budget implementation, have been well managed.
Debt servicing costing nearly 100% of revenues, budget deficit of 6.5%. We got it down so far in the first half of this year. The debt service to around 60% or so of revenues, which is still eye-wateringly high, but we're coping with it, and by prioritization, of course.
Is there a level of gross reserves that you're aiming to achieve where you would be happier?
Showing keen interest in information shared, potential investors asked for more clarity in areas of interest, which span from subsidy removal and the gains of it.
It's October 2 that we had a situation where the major subsidies costing 5% of GDP, petrol subsidy and the related foreign exchange subsidy, were effectively removed through a move to market pricing of petroleum. What that has meant is that it is really from then that you can look at accruing what exactly are the gains from removal. You can't have the gains from something that disappears from one place but rears its ugly head in another place.
As well as the management of financial instruments.
Differentials between OMO and the T-bills. Really, the yields from OMO reflect target levels, and we are issuing more in actual fact to ensure that the transmission mechanism works as we expect it to. The divergence on the T-bills, quite frankly, is a response to the markets, and over a period of time, those should, I imagine those should adjust as we expect them to.
Another forum ends, however, whether the investors have been won over to push funds to Nigeria's economy will be noted in the coming days. Ini John Mekwa, Channels Television News.
And more data from the National Bureau of Statistics. See, Nigeria residential energy demand side data shows, which includes charcoal, firewood, LPG, electricity from the national grid, all of that demand. The data shows fuel wood contribute about 40.7% of households purchased fuel woods, and charcoal, that's about 64.7% of households. They cut the wood used in charcoal production. Then for LPG, about 19.4% of households use LPG. That was in the last 30 days. Then for the grid supply, about 58.2% of households are connected to the electricity national grid supply. Well, join us to discuss prospects for Nigeria's energy transition process. We have Mr. Demola Ogunbajo, the President, CEO, Owando Clean Energy Limited, joining me right here in the studio. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Larry.
So looking at that data, you know, we've all been talking about energy transition, a just transition, you know, for Africa. And we have, you know, organizations like IRENA saying that we have to ramp up investment when it comes to renewables. So looking at, you know, Nigeria, you know, presently, how would you describe our transition process? Have we made some level of progress so far, in your opinion?
Absolutely, we have. As a matter of fact, we happen to be the first African country to release a comprehensive plan, which is the Energy Transition Plan that was released about 3 years ago. And what we have done with that plan is to show the world that we're serious about energy transition, we're committed to it, but we know how we're going to transition. We're curating our own transition ourselves. Yes, there's a global agenda. That's, you know, there's been attempts here and there to try to stamp a template of transition on the African continent. But by releasing that plan, Nigeria showed leadership, not only in commitment, but also in thinking through the process of the transition. Yes, a lot of people will say, you know, the energy transition is a little too heavy on gas. But then again, that's what we need as a transition fuel to provide the base load that's required to pull the trigger on industrialization, manufacturing, digital economy, and, you know, the industrial age that we're just now experiencing, all right? That said, however, we're clear as to what we want to do with transportation. That plan commits to electrifying public transportation in Nigeria by 2060, all of it. All right? That plan also has as an objective, I think it's the number 2 objective actually, the localization of the manufacturing of solar panels, because we have a huge agenda on the solar side that's been largely driven today by the REA, doing a great job there. And they also deploy other technologies beyond solar, but we all know that the 2 most advanced renewable energy sources today happen to be solar and wind. That said, however, we're also looking at the localization of EVs, both EV and solar modules, by 2025. And a whole lot of work is ongoing in that regard. The Energy Transition Office is leading the charge there. The NCCC is contributing significantly on the policy side to ensure that there's clarity as to how we're going to transition. Now, when you speak to just transition basically, in my opinion, means that we must not transition Africa into poverty. Therefore, we have got to retain the value that the energy transition process will generate on the African continent. And the best way to do that is to build local capacity, not only for technical expertise, but for industrial as well. So the localization of EV assembly in Nigeria is one of such. The localization of solar module assembly is one of such. And then producing hydrogen, biofuels, biogas, and other elements that feed into the energy transition to provide the kind of energy that we require, so that we see that number, the stats that you read out, about over 40% of Nigerians still burning wood.
Right.
So that we can see that kind of stats go down. And I say that, to point to the fact that it's a double whammy in that regard. When we burn wood for cooking, we release carbon emissions into the environment. It hurts the environment, but it hurts us in return. But what it also means that what that does is, to get the wood, we cut down trees, which means we're deforesting, which then means that nature's capacity to absorb the carbon that is being released is also being impaired. So that affects our health at the end of the day. You then see a whole lot of the impact of climate change and deforestation. We already see, but a lot of us can't, connect the dots. Right? So you see a number of people, communities being displaced, not because of conflict, but because of climate change. Because their vegetation has receded, so they keep migrating down south. Some of the issues you find between the herdsmen and farmers, right, is due to foraging, okay? Leaving the north, coming down south for foraging, okay? And that's a function of climate change.
And quite a lot you've unpacked, there, definitely. But at the end of the day, we're seeing Nigerians have to pay a lot when it comes to energy. Shout out to the Band A, customers, all those, having to, drive their cars with fuel over 1,000 Naira, per liter. So looking at what's playing out right now, how much of a risk is a cost of living crisis? We're seeing what's happening with the currency, right now, even though solar panels were cheap in the global market, but coming in here, it's expensive. So how much of these economic headwinds is putting a span in the wheel of this transition process?
We can't ignore the impact of the foreign exchange volatility. What it's done to our purchasing power, primarily, because we're net consumers, right? What I mean by that is we import most of the things that we consume. And in a situation where that is the case, it means the dollar becomes a commodity in itself. So Naira chases the dollar. It's basic demand and supply principles, right? You have limited supply of dollars, and then you have, somewhat...
outsized demand.
So we go after the limited dollars that's available because we want to import what we consume. that puts us on the back foot. And that points to the first point that I made earlier. We have got to build local capacity. We have got to consume locally. So even when it comes to energy transition, the sun is here. We don't have to import it.
Right, thank God for that.
What we need to import today is the technology to convert the sun into energy. But what we need to import is not necessarily the panels that convert the sun to energy, but the technology, which is the know-how. Which means what the private sector and the public sector must do is work closely together to build that manufacturing capacity and capability locally. Because if we do assembly, it's a start. But assembly means I still import components, paying dollars for the components, and then putting the components together here. It cuts out some cost, reduces, the price somewhat, but it doesn't take away the larger challenge of the fact that we're still net importers. So whatever it is that we do for this energy transition, we must not repeat what we have done with the oil and gas sector, where we would, drill for crude, export the crude, and then import gasoline. We've seen the effect of that. We continue to see the effect of that. Now that we must not repeat with the transition program. We must build local capacity to take away all these issues. Even when it comes to, commodity items, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whatever it is. If you do not produce locally, you will continue to import.
But in that whole, process of, getting to produce, sometimes you just need to supplement with a couple of imports. But we've heard, I've heard complaints about duties, at the ports, still, driving up the price, when it gets to the end consumer. So what kind of conversations are being had in, slashing some of these duties for some of these sensitive materials we need for renewable energy?
Oh no, so the federal government's doing a whole lot of work in that regard. A lot of us do not know this, but whether it's solar panels, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's charging infrastructure, or even some of the complements of CNG rollout, all of those items are currently VAT free. And you also have the opportunity to apply to the federal government to get a waiver on duty to encourage importation for now. But what must happen is as we build local capacity through manufacturing, then we must go back to tariff for imported goods. Or else we'll have a challenge with allowing that local capacity to thrive. Everybody recognizes the fact that China has a higher level of efficiency when it comes to manufacturing, not only in comparison to Africa, but the entire world. All right? So if we continue to import from China, particularly if we do so without duties being paid or VAT being paid, because those elements fall under the energy transition program, then it means that we will not build the local capacity that is required to then drive, the kind of scale that we need to see. Recognizing that most of the funds that we are going to spend on these projects anyways, we're going to borrow. So look across the African continent. You will see different PV infrastructure projects designed for different regions across the continent. And if you put a number to it, Africa will spend north of $50 billion by 2030 on PV infrastructure alone. And if current trends continue, 90 to 95% of all of that money will find its way to China in exchange for solar modules and other components. So we have got to retain that value on the continent, and the best way to do it is to build local capacity for the supply of the things that we require. And that's the only direction to go.
All right, and definitely we've heard from most organizations in the renewables sector saying you need to ramp up investment, in renewables right now, but they've also talked about not leaving Africa behind when it comes to these investments, because Africa just accounts for about 1% or so, most of those investments. But, putting aside the issue of corruption, financial mismanagement, do you think Africa can somehow make this funding on its own?
We can fund our own way. I'll limit it to an individual so that we can understand this and connect with it. If a group of people, group of friends, have an agenda to see the world, travel the world, and some of them are, they have the money, they're ready today to go, and some don't have the money, they're not ready today to go. You can lean on your richer friends and say, let's create one pot. I'll put my little, you put your much, and then we see the world together at the same time. But if your richer friends are not that responsive, then you can say, you know what? We'll create a different schedule. You guys go now. I'll save up for my own trip. And I will go on the trip when I can afford it. That's what I mean by Africa can actually pay our own way. We just need to ensure that we curate our own timelines, we design our own transition mix, and we invest gradually. However, it means that my richer friends have no right to then put pressure on me on the timeline. So the world can do net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050, however you can afford. But maybe I will do net zero by the turn of the century, because that's what I can afford. If you want me to achieve it, by the way, by 2050, then perhaps you bring investment. So yes, we can pay our own way. We just need to ensure that we have a plan. It's a coordinated plan. The AU needs to sit at the center of this, that's the African Union, play the same role that the EU is playing, and then we follow through. We set our own standards, we curate our own energy mix, and then we do our own schedule. We know our timelines. However, again, I reiterate, if we are to do it on the same timeline as the rest of the world, then the rest of the world, who have polluted the environment much more than Africa can ever do, must be ready to then fund the Africa journey.
Fantastic. Well said. Let our rich friends carry most of that burden. But thank you so much. It was great having your perspective, Mr. Ademola Ogunbanjo, President, CEO, Owando Clean Energy Limited.
Thank you, Laddie.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure being here.
And we're hoping for a cleaner world, definitely.
Look forward to it.
All right, so we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll get a check on what's playing out in the commodities market. That's in a moment. Just stay with us. Welcome back. Well, let's get a quick check on what's playing out in the commodity market. Now we have Halima Adedinro as an analyst, the senior analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Great to have you, Halima. So we're seeing some movement there in the oil market. We're seeing Brent up about 1% earlier. What's driving sentiment now?
Okay, thank you for having me, Laddie. As I said earlier, the prices in the Middle East is becoming more intense than what the market expected in the beginning of the week. We see that there is an airstrike by Israel to Iran, and this the move by the US to douse the tension of the spillover of the conflict in Lebanon as it's a gridlock. So that is increasing the fear or concerns of traders in the global market as regards the supply of crude oil in the global market. And apart from that, when we look at the demand side, the US data that just came out recently showed that the economy stockpile of crude oil increased much more than what is expected. And as we all know that US is a large consumer of crude, this is giving trader a kind of reduced expectation in the demand side in the US economy. So that's why we are seeing fluctuation in the price of global crude oil.
But from all that's playing out in this oil market, it almost seems that it's tending towards weakness. That's for prices. You know, even though we see some, rises here and there, there's always that big drop, like what we saw last week, about 7%. In the long run, into this, or in the short term, into this fourth quarter, do you see oil maybe sub 50 at some point?
No, I'm not seeing it going as low as that. But what would tell us the actual direction of the price in the near to medium term will be determined by the pressure or the significance of the intensity of the crisis. So if the US is able to meddle and make at least a peace or reduce the intensity of the crisis, we are likely to see a reduced price, because that means to some extent in the future the supply is ascertained in the Middle East, which is one of the largest producer of crude oil in the global market.
Right, and we've seen the IMF, revise Nigeria's growth for 2024. How much of that is a risk for the currency? We're seeing the FX market, there was weakness again for the close in the official window, but there was some kind of appreciation for the parallel market.
Okay, so for the Forex, let's take that first. If you look at the official market, we'll see that it's almost flat, but we can call it like a depreciation. But in the parallel market, there's an appreciation of like a Naira to a dollar, which can relatively be called flat as well. So if we look at the data that was released recently, the H1 Forex inflow in Nigeria this year increased by about 45% to $8.9 billion, just because there is high interest rate. We have high interest rate environments now, and is increasing portfolio investment. So that's why we have that surge in the trade surplus. However, that might not be maintained if in the next few months we are seeing a decline in the interest rate. So that on the supply side of the Forex might be affected. So if we look at the revision of the IMF, this is the third one this year. In April, it was 3.3. And in July, the growth was revised downward to 3.1. And now it is being revised downward to 2.9%. So, and there are so many factors that are put into consideration to give this downward revision. One is the insecurity, and another thing is the flood that just recently happened. So it's going to, the body is saying that it's going to affect the supply and the ample agricultural produce that is meant to reduce the high inflation environment. And not only that, we are seeing some kind of douse optimism when it comes to oil production. Though Nigeria is planning to increase oil production to 2 million barrels per day from under 1.4 million barrels per day that we currently have. So all this, if this is achieved, we could see an increase in the inflow of dollar, which could make the IMF upgrade the target of the country.
All right, thank you so much, Halima. We'll keep tracking to see how it all plays out. Halima Adedinro, Senior Analyst, Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you so much. All right, so right here, we're going to be joining a live coverage now, the Katsina State Roundtable discussion with development partners. That's happening at the Niger Plateau Hall, Transcorp Hilton Hotel, Abuja. That's happening on DSTV. But all of this else is still live on all other platforms. I'll hand things over now to the Sunrise Daily team.